I really want to know the perspective of a professional who made a conscious decision to get into a certain line of work that you knew was dangerous before you made the decision to involve yourself in this line of work. And also, you go through training to endure or to mimic or to replicate these traumatic, dangerous environments you may place yourself in. Yet and still, you still want the excuse of I was afraid. Yeah. So the I was afraid, you have to, the first attribute to being a policeman is being courageous. Yeah. You must be courageous in order to be a policeman. If you scary and you shaky, then you need to maybe
get another job.
Try a hairstylist.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But if you are going to be a policeman, that means that day in, day out, for the sake of the safety of the community, you place yourself in these situations because you are prepared. Right. And because you are courageous. And for you to place all of the accountability on citizens who have not been trained, right, who did not make a conscious decision to get into a dangerous line of work, this is not their responsibility. They did not take an oath. Yeah. They are, so you can't place all of the accountability on the citizens and expect 100% impunity to come to trained professionals who are supposed to be trained professionals. What is the logic behind that? Is it just sheer delusion of grandeur?
Well, I believe, and I agree with you, it is totally illogical. It's irrational for somebody to say that every time we shoot somebody, I was in fear of my life, and it happened so quickly, I just couldn't make a rational decision about it. So the way that the law now expresses what should happen is that rather than the case being judged from that officer's state of mind, it is judged from what a reasonable police officer would have done. And this is the thing that we saw in this case.
Now I have one more thing to say to that. A lot of people say it's the training. I don't think it's the training. Because we're being shown time and time again that police officers know how to treat citizens whenever they deal with white people. Right. Whenever they're dealing with white people, they seem to know exactly how to be polite, right, courteous, tactful, right, professional. They seem to know exactly what to say, exactly, when to use more excessive force. Right. However, when the skin tone changes, so does the approach, right, the mentality, and the procedure. So I don't think it's the training.
Well, let me say this, and I'm probably would get in trouble for saying this, but
it wouldn't be the first time you got in trouble, yeah, Paul. So I think you can take it.
Let me tell you, the reason that I agree with what you're saying is when I saw them kick Mr. Brooks when he was laying on the pavement. When I saw one of those officers actually stand on Mr. Brooks's chest. He got off his chest, he moved around, and then he came back. He
stood on his chest?
He stood on his chest.
After, 2 wounds in the back?
The man was shot in his back and shot in the buttocks, and the officer stood on him. He then went to the other side of his body, and then he stood on his arm. And
rather than administer aid.
That's correct. That's what they did.
They stood on his chest, basically pushing the blood out of the wounds.
And so the reason I said that maybe this will get me in trouble is that for me, being an African-American man, I would rather sentence you for standing on the body even above you shooting him. Because I think standing on a man's body is the ultimate insult. An insult not only to him, but an insult to our community.
That's right.
Because when he did that, this man laid in a public parking lot over at Wendy's. And those policemen knew that there were many people standing there watching him. but they didn't care.
Right.
They did it anyway. But to your point, if you saw the video that took place, it lasted about 41 minutes. When you see the conversation between Mr. Brooks, and these two officers, you would never imagine that Mr. Brooks would end up dead.
Right.
Mr. Brooks was calm.
He was.
He was compliant.
Yep.
Every question that they asked Mr. Brooks, he answered it.
Right.
And I actually had my staff to count. They asked him the same question as many as 9 times.
Damn.
But Mr. Brooks answered every question.
Right.
And so finally they got to the point where Mr. Brooks just said to them, he said, hey, look, I'm going to be walking right over across the street to this hotel. He said, you got my car? You got my driver's license? He said, just let me walk over there. I agree with you because at that point, if Mr. Brooks had been another kind of man, there's no way
a white man,
they would have continued to operate in the same way.
This is true.
So what this officer did, and I thought it was really important that we charged Officer Roth with an Atlanta police regulation. And what the regulation says is that when you arrest someone for a DUI, you have to immediately inform them that I'm placing you on arrest for a DUI.
Right.
But that's not what he did.
Right.
After carrying this very casual conversation, all of a sudden he moves to his rear and he attempts to restrain his arm. And when he did that, that was the first time that you saw any adverse conduct on the part of Mr. Brooks when his arm was grabbed and brought to his rear. And so what that said to me is that they had no reason to fear this man.
Right.
They had already asked him, did he have a weapon? Mr. Brooks told them no.
Right.
They asked him, could they pat him down? They patted him down, and the only thing that they found was a bulge in his pocket. And you know, all of us have had some experience with the police. If you got a bulge in your pocket, most of us know what the police are going to do is they're going to ask you to take it out and let me see it.
Right.
They took the guy's word for it. He said, man, this is some money. He said, I think he said it was some dollar bills, which said to me they were very comfortable with him in the way that he was acting. So when Mr. Brooks tried to run, and that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to get away.
Right.
When he got the taser, he was trying to run away. And I know that the public was somewhat misled because they were shown a photograph or a videotape that showed Mr. Brooks firing the taser back at the officer. And what was said at that time was that is when the officer shot him. That is not true. That's not when the officer shot him. If you look at the tape very carefully, you'll see that they had moved Mr. Brooks and the officer some 10 or 12 feet beyond that point. It was beyond that point when they were about 18 feet 3 inches, because we measured it. That's how far they were apart. Mr. Brooks's back was turned to the officer, and that's when the officer fired the shot. And so, in my view, the officer had no reason to fear Mr. Brooks. He had no reason to fear that Mr. Brooks would harm anybody else because Mr. Brooks was simply trying to run. Because what he told the man is, I just want to go to the hotel across the street because his girlfriend was waiting over there. I think that's what he said. And he wanted to get over there. And he shot him in the back. And this is the thing that I think is critical for people trying to analyze this case. There's something in the law that's called excited utterance. And that is when somebody, in the heat of a moment, makes a statement, but they make the statement without having the time to consult with somebody, to ask a lawyer what to say, or to read something. They just say what's on their mind. So in that moment, Officer Rolfe said, I got him. So if you interpret that, that doesn't sound like I'm scared of him.
Right.
I fear him.
Sounds as though you were hunting him.
He said, I got him.